The Heat are in the NBA Finals, and I'll admit, I'm a little surprised. Yes, I'm very surprised. I'm shocked this happened. Going towards the end of the regular season, we'll go over some of that stuff again. I just did not see it. I did not think it would happen. I think Boston losing this one at home in Game 7 actually makes a lot of sense if you think about this team. You know, as frustrating as they've been, I've pointed out times in the past, it's like, okay, but this group actually has gone through some of the battles and come out on the other side. So how could they look like they've never been around this before? You know, it's not like it was a team that won all these games out of nowhere and it's their first run together as a young group. That's not entirely true, right? It's just not true. But them losing like they did last night, I actually going into it wasn't all that surprised. Like, again, I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what was going to happen. And normally, forget Boston or even Miami, if a team were the better team, the higher seeded team, the team that I believe had more talent on the roster, which I know some people are sick of hearing about, if that team has come back from a 3-0 deficit to tied at 3 and it is going home, I'd probably always pick that team. But my respect for the Heat and my questions about Boston, specifically offensively when things get tight, like I could see Miami actually winning this thing, even if I'll admit I didn't know. I feel like any result wasn't going to be all that surprising. The Heat are smarter than Boston. They're tougher than Boston. They're more connected than Boston. They have a better coach. And these are all the elements of a basketball team that would scare you, except history tells us that the things that really scare you are having a couple all-stars, having a bunch of them. So when I look at the game, I could go through the game recap stuff, but I don't know that it's all that significant, other than the number one thing that I would take from this series is Boston sucks against the zone. Before the series started, I'd made the point that Miami had run more zone sets or more possessions zone defensively than any other team in the NBA in 19 years. Okay? So if you're Denver and you're preparing for the finals now, you could say, all right, the number one priority is focusing on trying to figure out a way to beat this Miami zone that extends really far out, screws you up. And even when you think you have open shots, at least for Boston, and we'll get to their shooting in a second, it never felt comfortable. Like the zone you're supposed to figure out at some point and then get really easy looks from 3 off of it. Or if they sell out to guard against the line, there should be all sorts of space, and then you're supposed to be able to out-rebound the other team. There's problems. There's reasons why teams usually won't default to zone all the time, because once it gets broken, it's kind of over, and Boston could never really break it. Although thinking of Jokic against a zone, I like Denver's chances a little bit better than Boston's. If you're on the Boston side of things, you can get into the Missoula conversation, and we could talk timeouts, substitution patterns, rotations, what's he doing here, and all this kind of stuff. Them not understanding how to break the zone at any point is the biggest knock against Missoula, but it's also on the team because, is it Missoula's fault that Jaylen Brown can't dribble again in the playoffs for a second year? I mean, Jaylen Brown is one of the weirdest players ever because there's this one thing that's super important for a wing player to be able to do, and that's, I don't know if you've heard of it, dribble, and he can't. And once the other team figures it out, it happened against Miami, specifically that Game 3 game last year where I was like, oh my God, this is getting really bad. Like now they get it. As soon as he puts it on the floor, go to attack him. It's not even about right or left like Stan Van Gundy was pointing out last night. It's just straight up having to dribble in traffic. He can't do it. It'd be like somebody in the UFC where it's like, is that fighter any good? And you're like, he's actually pretty good, but he's terrible against kicks. Well, what do you mean? You just kick him. Well, he must suck then. No, that's the weird thing. He's not like the best fighter, but he's still pretty good. But you can just kick him? Yeah, he's got this one major flaw. You just kick him. He never checks anybody's kicks. It's just super easy to kick him. Well, he must suck. No, he doesn't, though. That's the weird thing. So that's not Missoula's fault. And the three-point shooting, look at some of these numbers here. Jaylen Brown, we'll get to him. Tatum turns his ankle on the first possession. That's a factor last night. I don't know why anyone would think it isn't. It was. He shot 1 of 4 on threes yesterday, which was actually an improvement for him against the Heat. Because against the Heat, Game 6, 0 for 8. Game 5, 1 for 6. Game 4, 4 for 9. Game 3, 1 for 7. Game 2, 3 for 10. Game 1, 1 for 3. He shot 23% from 3 against Miami. Now you could say, well, that's the playoffs. We knew this. You say it all the time. The playoffs are different. But Tatum, the previous 2 years in 29 playoff games, was 39% from 3. Jaylen Brown, who again can't dribble, Shot 16% from three against Miami. He had one game in this entire series where he made more than 1 3. He shot 52% and 43% from three against Atlanta and Philadelphia. Al Horford was number 2 in the NBA from three, 45%. Only Luke Kennard shot it better from distance than Al Horford did. He was under 30% in the playoffs, 28% against the Heat. So there's a part of the summary here where you could say, well, Boston just didn't make enough threes to make or miss league. That is not what I saw. I saw them missing them, but I saw them missing them because of the Heat's defense. And that even on catches, Horford always looked rushed. Jalen always looked in between decisions. Tatum had a lot of moments where you could tell, do I drive? Do I step back? Oh, am I settling too much? Do I need to be more aggressive? And that is all because of the Heat and how uncomfortable they make you. But at some point, you're supposed to get comfortable against the zone. In Boston, never did. I'm actually almost glad Boston lost in a way because they were so certain that they were the better team last year against Golden State, which again, rarely do you have athletes at this level, competitors, start giving everybody else credit, right? Like nobody actually thinks anybody's better than them. Remember what was it, the quarterback stuff with Robert Griffin III at one point? I think he was a backup. And he was like, yeah, I still think I'm the best quarterback in the league. It's like, okay, maybe you shouldn't say it anymore. And at that point, I think he might have been with Cleveland, so he was still going to be the starter, but he got hurt again. So I don't take offense to it when teams will say, oh, we let that one get away. I mean, I think that's a lot of these guys are wired, but they came off of the Golden State loss in the finals last year, like thinking it was just kind of a break here or a break there. And maybe some of you would argue that. I saw one team in Golden State that knew what they could do offensively and were always comfortable, where another team in Boston was very uncomfortable and scattered offensively and not really sure what to do, but they were better defensively than they were this year, so they could always kind of default back to that. So this is year 2 of this team, despite the talent, despite the 57 wins in the regular season, some of the offensive numbers that would tell you this offense should carry over that we also saw in previous series, not only this year, but previous years. Whatever their mindset is, whatever it is that they're trying to do, however they're built collectively, and I'm not saying tear it down and trade everybody away because this group still gives you a chance, which is the whole point of putting together one of these rosters. There's just something off. And maybe them losing to the Heat like this after losing in the finals last year will get to them to kind of collectively admit to themselves they need to be a little bit different. So the Heat are the most unlikely finals participant of my NBA lifetime. Why? Let's review. They have a negative point differential. The last team to make the NBA Finals with a negative point differential, the 1959 Minneapolis Lakers. When I look at teams and whether or not they can win an NBA championship, I'll ask a simple question. Who are your 2 guys? And when I say 2 guys, I mean scoring guys, not Donovan Mitchell and postseason accolade Rudy Gobert. Who are your shot-creating players? Who are the guys that are going to bail you out of tough postseason possessions? Well, normally it has to be a top 10 guy, and none of us really thought that was even Jimmy Butler before the Milwaukee series. We'll reevaluate that, and even if the Heat were to lose the finals going into next year, Butler's going to be on everybody's top 10 list, so that's fine. But it wasn't a certainty, and really you kind of need like one of those top 4 to 5 to 6 guys, depending on how deep you think that first tier is in any season in the NBA. So there's the Jimmy part of that. The Bam part, who as much as I love him, and every team should want a Bam on their squad, none of us are calling him a superstar. So you're like, all right, so wait, Miami, do they even have a second superstar? I think the simple answer to this is no. And then you go, okay, well, if Bam is their second best player, all-star level accolades, just missing out on third team All-NBA, if there had been a fourth team, I would have voted him for that. So let's give him his credit. But I think we're all on the same page. They're like, okay, is he really one of those dudes who's going to be able to carry you offensively at times? I'd say more often than not in the playoffs, like you start to kind of question yourself of how much you get dependent on offensively, despite certain nights where he's going to go off. So who's your number 2 shot creating guy? Is it Caleb Martin? I guess it is. Now, you could also go back 12 years and talk about Dallas and Dirk being the number 1 guy and then asking who the Mavericks number 2 guy is. The point is that it actually is, that's how rare it is. It's been over a decade. And the number 2 answer for that Mavericks team isn't super easy, but they also were a 57-25 3 seed that won the title against Miami in 11. So Caleb Martin, to review, was an undrafted dude out of NC State, Nevada. He was a 24-year-old rookie. He was waived by Charlotte in 21. He's always hit threes, but has so far been a net negative in the box score plus minus for 3 of his 4 years. He had an 11 PER this season. And even though I liked him, we're talking about somebody that scored 11 points per game in the first and second rounds of the playoffs. Against Boston, he was 19 and 6 boards there on 60 and 49 shooting splits, 49% from 3. Okay? This guy was so good. Jimmy Butler led the team last night with 28 points and won the Eastern Conference Finals MVP. But I thought Caleb Martin last night, his shots were the biggest shots. Anytime Boston felt like they were even getting any kind of sniff of momentum, any kind of comeback in the second half, Caleb Martin was hitting the daggers, and he hit him every single time. But if that's your number 2 on a roster, an undrafted dude who to this point has been a nice player, I'm probably not going to think you have the depth to top to do what Miami just did. He had 135 total points in the Eastern Conference Finals for Caleb Martin. That is the most points in a conference finals or NBA finals by an undrafted player since the modern draft era started in 1966 and 67. So I know now that the Heat are in the finals, and I was wrong, I know what's supposed to happen. I'm supposed to repent to the audience. I'm supposed to beg forgiveness for my sins. I'm not going to do any of that shit, okay? Because the point that I need to hammer home is that this doesn't happen, okay? This doesn't happen. I know they were a 1 seed last year, and maybe some of you would argue, well, they were always kind of this good, and they didn't really care about the regular season. I'm not going to do that, okay? Hey, what about the Knicks? They were an 8 seed. You're going to have Van Gundy on. You're going to talk to him about that. Back in 99. Yeah, they didn't beat the Spurs, but that was an 8 seed. They were only 6 games off the 1 seed in a labor-shortened season. They had the highest payroll by a pretty wide margin in the league that year. That team was actually pretty talented when you go back and look at it. Because this next part is not about Miami. This is about every team ever moving forward with the way that I'll watch this league. The next team that's 25th in offense, 27th from 3, has to rely on an undrafted player as the number 2 go-to scoring option in the playoffs, doesn't have a top 10 guy. Again, we'll revisit that with the Jimmy story that ends this year, however it ends. That loses the play-in game at home to Atlanta by double digits, has a point differential that's closer to Utah than Portland. I'm never picking that team, ever. I'm never going to look at that team with that resume and go, yeah, I could see it. I'm never picking that team. But this point is about Miami, okay? I bring this up not to be negative about them, but it's so that we all understand how special this is. This is an historic group. This is one of the great stories as far as overcoming the odds. So that's one of the things that I kind of battle with here. It's like, wait, this is so special, and it's so special it is because it should never be expected. I'll never look at a team with what they did this regular season, even after being a 1 seed last year. It was a 53-win team. It wasn't like there was some juggernaut. I'll never look at that and go, yeah, that team right there, that's the one I'm banking on. So that's where Miami deserves all the credit you can give them, while also understanding that this doesn't happen in this league. It doesn't happen. Now, are we in the early stages of looking at roster building and saying, oh, it can all be different? No, I don't think that's going to happen at all. We're going to look at some of these big 3 results and say, well, everybody chasing all these stars. Miami proved that you shouldn't do it that way. They proved this season that in a special season, it's possible, but I don't think it's, let's not lose our minds about how GMs are going to start looking at how they want to build out their team. Because guess what's going to happen? The next awesome dude who's available, the 2 guys that get mad this summer, decide they want out, a bunch of teams are going to want them. They're not going to go, hey, are there any undrafted 24-year-olds that we can two-way that'll score 20 a game in the Eastern Conference Finals? And I keep repeating that so that it is understood that this should be appreciated, never expected. Spo was a little emotional last night when they were doing the ceremony. He also may have been just exhausted. But I think the reason he was emotional was because basketball coaches are crazy, right? They're crazy because when they watch the film, they'll see a guy not try. They'll see somebody just not give that effort. The coaches want this effort that kind of never exists. They want to watch game film and see everything executed perfectly. And I don't know that that's ever going to exist in a basketball game, right? You can come close to it, but you're never going to get it perfect. And sometimes the coach becomes really annoying because he keeps thinking that perfect exists. But what you want is you want to go into a game like last night thinking you have a chance because your guys can actually fight and that you can trust them. And if they don't make enough shots, the other team gets a couple looks or, a couple bounces. Either way, you lose the basketball game. You at least know when you go back and watch the film, hey, our guys fought. And that's why I think Spo going through the East with this group and acting the way he's acted, which again, I'm complimenting him here, being confident, being exhausted, being relieved, but knowing, hey, at least I know my guys are going to show up. Having said that, Nuggets in 6.